If you haven't talked to your kids about drugs, make an appointment.
Yo, Mom, you want to see me?
And if you don't know what to say, ask us. For a free parent's guide to drug prevention, call 1-800-624-0100.
Popular Mechanics presents stock car racing's most challenging tracks and turns.
It's a quest, a search for the holy, a moment, perhaps an entire afternoon, when an almost infinite number of mechanical variables combine with the courage of one man, a race car driver. It comes together as the perfect setup, and you're dialed in and can overcome your ultimate opponent. Oh, not the other cars and drivers, but the racetrack itself. And if you can defeat the asphalt and concrete, which changes hour by hour, even moment by moment, as if it were a living thing itself, then the checkered flag will be yours. Hello everyone, I'm Benny Parsons, and welcome to stock car racing's most challenging tracks and turns. The quest for the perfect setup, the perfect line, the perfect race actually starts here. This is far from the glamour of race day, as crew chiefs combine technological knowledge with their hard-won experiences of the specific challenge each track presents. We've been lucky enough to bring you this video from the shop of one of their premier teams in all of racing, Hendrick Motorsports. This is the home of Terry Labonte and his Kellogg Chevrolet, Ken Schrader, and the Kodiak car, and young Jeff Gordon, who drives the DuPont Chevrolet. On this very special video, myself, now I'm a former Winston Cup champion. I also work for ESPN as an analyst. I'll be joined by racing's elite, and we're going to put you in the driver's seat and take you behind pit wall to show you what it really takes to set up a car to attack the toughest tracks on the circuit and handle a 3,500-pound, 700-horsepower machine with an engine turning over 8,000 RPMs while you're cruising in the neighborhood of 200 miles per hour. And we're going to visit the toughest tracks where it all takes place, and you'll see what happens when it all goes right and wrong. On this tape, we're going to take you on a journey from the high-bank short tracks of Brisol, Tennessee, to the endless and winding road courses on each coast, and to the supercharged excitement of the super speedway at Daytona. Of the 18 stock car racing venues visited each year, we've chosen the tracks and turns that pose the greatest challenge to drivers, mechanics, and race cars. Our first stop will be at probably one of the most unique racetracks you'll find anywhere, Pocono International Raceway, the nemesis of the North, a place where road course complexity meets the high speeds of the super speedways, a particularly daunting combination.
Pocono has been real tough for us. It's like a drag strip down the front. It is real flat on the corner. The final turn is a really long corner, and the car slides forever to get the best compromise in gearing for the long straightaway, and to get the best balance in the car to let it slide around the final turn, I think, is the biggest challenge we've had.
As far as making a car handle one of the toughest racetracks, to me, it's Pocono. You know, because of the three different turns, the banking is different in all three. You got the long straightaway where you can't give up a lot of drag going down the front stretch.
At Pocono, aerodynamics, shifting, and RPMs all come into play because of the unique qualities of the racetrack's triangular layout. Here's Brett Bodine to take you around the track.
Driving into the first turn, you got to make sure you get in there deep enough that a guy can't sneak underneath you or can't outbrake you getting in the first turn. A lot of brake is used to slow the car down because that's long front straightaway. But around the bottom, right on the inside, as low as you can, actually even up over the inside apron to maybe set the car and help turn the car. Going down that long back straightaway, getting ready for the tunnel turn. This is where different approaches to the tunnel turn come into play. It depends on how the car's working. If you got a car that's loose getting into the tunnel turn, you tend to drive in straighter and lower and turn the car more in the middle. If you got a car that's a little tight on exit, you tend to stay out a little wider, sweep the car in, and try to cut across the inside curb, maybe hit it with the left front to help turn the car. Then as you approach the third turn on the short straightaway, again, the same thing. If you've got a loose race car getting in there, you got to go in lower and tighter. If you've got a car that's pushing when you get to the middle, you got to stay out a little wider, sweep across, and again, try to run very, very low. The low line around 3 is the quick way, but there can be some passing done in the second lane if you got a car that's really hooked up.
Anywhere on the track, an error can extract their price, but nowhere is more true than its most famous turn, the fabled tunnel turn. A turn named because of the fact it's over a tunnel that leads to the infield. Even some of the greatest drivers have suffered from the results of the smallest mistake in the infamous turn.
He's upside down. Into the guardrail, side over side, end over end, and Davey Allison has experienced a horrifying crash.
Davey would be okay and go on to challenge for the 1992 Winston Cup. However, a year later, he would lose his life in a tragic helicopter crash. The fact that you have long straightaways allowing a driver to build up tremendous speed but then have to go into sharp turns means that the challenge is finding the right combination of variables. You need aerodynamics for high-speed drafting, as well as short track handling, which means as the crew chief makes his decisions, politicians have nothing on him when it comes to the art of compromise. To unlock a few of these secrets at all the tough tracks we're going to visit on this tape, I'll be joined by a true master of everything you ever wanted to know, bumper to bumper, believe me, about setting up a race car. Larry McReynolds, a true living and still working legend. He's crew chief of the number 28 Haviland Ford. That's the one the late Davey Allison drove to victory at the Daytona 500 and is now driven by Ernie Irving. Now, as he'll do throughout the program, here's the real deal on what you have to do under the hood at one of stock car racing's most challenging tracks.
Our race team will really focus on turn 2, the tunnel turn, which is the fastest corner to racetrack. Also, we'll focus on turn 3. Is how your car goes through turn 3. It's going to determine how it runs and looks all the way down that long front straightaway. Normally, though, the situations I've been in, when you get it working good in turn 2 and turn 3, you'll be just fine in turn 1. Also, we get into something there that we only get into at one other racetrack, and that's shifting. We'll use all the different gears in the gearboxes. And aside from the road courses, the only other place that we shift is Pocono, Pennsylvania. Several years ago, nobody shifted at Pocono. Then along come 1 or 2 cars that shifted. They run pretty good, and people started looking around. Now, if you don't shift at Pocono, you pretty much can write yourself off of being competitive.
It has to be terrifying for a driver to go into turn 1 at Pocono at 195 miles an hour and have to shift. I mean, he's got his hands full, but all of a sudden he's got to shift at 195 miles an hour.
He's got to do 2 things. He's got to downshift that car to where it's in the proper gear when he comes off the exit of turn 2. He's got to concentrate on turning the car and getting it through turn 1. And also, even though Pocono's a 2.5-mile racetrack, you've got to be on the brakes. You've got to get yourself slowed down because you've tried to stay on the gas just as long as you could down that long front straightaway.
In June 1993, the prince of racing's royal family, Kyle Petty, mastered that tunnel turn and shifted perfectly through each corner, driving the perfect line to victory lane, as the Savco team found the right combination and dominated the triangular monster in unprecedented fashion, leading 148 of 200 laps, an incredible performance that surprised even Kyle, who captured it all on film, hoping to recapture that perfect combo next time at Pocono. Our next stop is at the rough and always tough short tracks, the bull rings of NASCAR. Martinsville is the classic of the group, one genuine tough little track.
Here's the Phillips 66 and car camper. Action outside. Position and Darrell Waltrip
gets banged by Sterling Marlin, and around he goes right in front of several cars. Jimmy Hendricks made contact, so has Bobby Labonte.
For the size of these race cars and the weight of these race cars, there's no room on that racetrack except one little lane, and it's real difficult for the driver to make a big difference around that racetrack because there's only one place to run. You have to be working better and out handling them, and still then you have to time it and plan it a whole lot more than you do on a racetrack where there's more grooves, where you can drive hard and take somebody on the outside or on the inside or whatever. The groove that you run around Martinsville is one track wide. I mean, and that's the only place you can really run and do anything.
In terms of its layout, it looks familiar to most serious fans. Basically a mirror image of the kind of place where Saturday night races have been run. Well, such a bunch of guys with fast cars decided to see whose was the fastest. Flat straights, tight corners, little banking. You can find one of these just about anywhere in the country, and most of the top drivers of today cut their teeth in a place just like it. But don't be misled. Familiar, yes, but man, never, ever easy. Here's a look. Martinsville, Virginia Speedway, just north of the North Carolina line in central Virginia. It's a .526 mile oval, flat on the straightaways, only 12 degrees of banking in the corners. And folks, at speed, the racetrack looks virtually flat in the corner. And you'll see that from on top of Mark Martin's Valvoline Ford, by the start-finish line, on the brakes, hard, all you possibly got to get the car woed going in turn one. See the white part of the racetrack? The corners are cement, concrete, both 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Accelerate off the corner, up against the outside retaining wall, down the back straightaway, accelerate into about 105 miles per hour. Now, the parachute once more, the brakes, all you got. To the inside of the racetrack, trying to stay in the groove. The concrete a little bit rough as you pick up the throttle, get some chatter. That's hard on the gears, hard on the engines. As we accelerate down toward the start-finish line, and you've just completed a lap at Martinsville. At every track, drivers and their crew chiefs search for that something that will give them an advantage, that will allow them to adjust the car just so for that particular track. At Martinsville, to deal with the high speeds on the straightaways and then the virtually flat turns, if there is a secret, it's in the suspension, specifically the springs.
Well, the thing we can do at Martinsville and the thing that'll help the racetrack really get a hold of the track is we can run the car real soft. Your entrance speed is...
When you say soft, you're talking about weak springs.
Weak springs. They're not as stiff as the springs that we would run at Daytona and Talladega. We're at Martinsville, we'll run like a pair of 900s in the front, a pair of 2 1/4s in the rear.
When you say a 900, okay, let's tell the folks what we're talking about when we use a number 900. That's compressing that spring, how much, an inch?
What we'll do to determine the rate of a spring is we'll load it to about 1,000 pounds on a spring rater, and then we'll travel it 1 inch, and what that number is that it gained in 1 inch, that's what we call that spring. So in other words, if we load that spring to 1,000 pounds and travel it 1 inch and it rates 1,900, we got to take the 1,000 away, and that's called a 900-pound front spring.
Let's get into the specifics at Martinsville. Ernie Irvin, your driver, goes out on the racetrack. He goes in the corner. He comes back in and says, well, the car's a little bit loose right in the middle of the corner. You get out your playbook. What if it's loose in the middle of the corner? Where do you go?
Well, there's several things we can do with the springs. We can soften both rear springs. In other words, we could go to 200-pound springs in the rear.
What determines that? What determines if you can go from 225 to 200? Is it the amount of travel on the shock absorbers, or is it just the feel of the driver?
A little bit of the feel of the driver. If the car is loose in the middle of the corner, but he feels like the car is falling down in the rear, then one of the things that we would take out of that playbook is going softer on the rear. We'll measure how much the shock's traveling. We have little tie wraps on the shock shafts, and every time the car goes out, we have those tie wraps pushed up to the top of the shock shaft, and when he comes in, we measure how much travel the car is getting. We might, at Martinsville, we might get 3 3/4 inches of travel on the right rear, maybe an inch less than that in the left rear. And the thing at Martinsville, especially with as flat as the racetrack is and as soft as springs as you're running, the car will roll, and the left front and the left rear will actually go into rebound. In other words, the body will come up off the tires, so you'll get rebound there. But normally, we can go as soft as 200-pound springs in the rear.
If you can hit the setup at Martinsville, success can be sweet. Just look at what McReynolds and his team did in the 1993 Goodies 500, leading 402 of 500 laps. Now that's called conquering a racetrack.
I tell you, Larry McReynolds, this is probably the best car it's ever hit Martinsville Speedway, you know. I mean, it just went all day. And
well, you can tell the guys that went back to work getting ready for this weekend. Martinsville presents the ultimate tech challenge of the short tracks. But when it comes to a short track that takes all that, plus a place that's daunting both psychologically and physically for a driver, you're talking about Bristol International Raceway, nestled up in the hills of Tennessee.
Dale Earnhardt in third place, and Earnhardt spins coming off too. And here's Fumble coming off of turn 4. Hutch Strickland is into the wall hard. Oh, it's a contact, and Copeman gets Gordon. Spin, and the caution is out. And Gordon bumps the wall before he can save it. Oh, and Blake Speed spins up in turn 1. And another caution waves.
Fans will remember that encounter with the wall at Bristol. And it's a miracle that Michael Waltrip walked away from that incredible wreck. Now, actually, that's not typical of an accident at Bristol or typical of the challenges faced by drivers at the track.
I was devastated. I was standing on the truck, Jeff and Sandy Jones and I, on the back straightaway at Bristol, and we were watching the race. And Michael had a problem, and he had spun. He and Kyle, I think it was, got together and they had spun, and so they were at the rear of the field. And so we were, I said, watch this, boys. I said, you're going to see something now, because he was running really good, and I knew he would be, wanting to get back to the front. And so when you're on the back straightaway and you're standing on a truck, you don't see the front straightaway. You can only see coming off of turn 2, going into turn 3. You just see basically the back straightaway. So we're kind of leaning over the edge of the truck, watching the cars come around turn 2 and go down the back. And we're standing there and watch him come off of that corner, and all of a sudden the 59 car takes him up the track, and when he does, he takes him way up, and when he does, Michael loses traction and he goes right into the end of that wall, and the car explodes. It just exploded. Well, I couldn't move. I was literally devastated. I thought I'd seen my brother killed. There's no way that car could fly apart like that. Him in it as big as he is, and it not have killed him. That's just what I thought. I couldn't move, and Jeff and Sandy had a hold of me, kind of holding me up. And then I said, I got to go to him because he might need me. I jumped off the truck and I went about 10 feet and I stopped again. I said, no, I can't. Y'all go and tell me what's happened. They started to go, and then I said, no, wait, I'll go with you. We get up there, and I'm assuming the worst. They're lifting the sheet metal off. They lift the top of the car up. I'm kind of down on the ground looking in the car, and there the big dummy sits. And he's just sitting there looking straight ahead. He's sitting on the ground, feet stuck straight out in front of him. Steering wheel ran up past his head. I'm crying. Michael, you okay? He looks around at me with with one of those disgusting looks of like, what are you doing here? What's wrong with you? And he looked at me and he says, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I don't know what's, I'm nothing's wrong with me. I'm okay. And it was an incredible, thought he was dead, and then he was okay, and then I felt like I was a big dummy for acting the way I did, and glad he was all right.
Now here's an in-depth look at the unique place we call the Bowl. Bristol, Tennessee, right up in the northeastern corner of Tennessee, next to Virginia and North Carolina. This racetrack, 0.533 miles in length. It's banked 36 degrees in each corner. That's right, folks, 36 degrees. The straightaways are banked 16 degrees. Now let's go inside Jeff Gordon's DuPont Chevrolet and take a lap by the start-finish line down in the corner. And we can see the racetrack is white. This racetrack is completely concrete all the way around and a little bit rough, about like driving the streets of Manhattan. On the gas hard, coming off the second corner. And as you come off this corner, the racetrack is just trying to throw you right into that wall on the outside. Accelerate down the back straightaway. Touch the brakes lightly as you go in turn 3, and it tries to throw the driver out the right side of the car. Now Gordon is back on the throttle here all the way right to the floor as he accelerates off the corner and down towards the start-finish line. And this thing, 500 laps here, is a man killer. When it's over here, you don't feel like doing anything except going home and going to bed.
I wouldn't doubt if Bristol 3 and 4 ain't about the toughest one. They're running so fast, and it's a change of the conduit changes so fast there. You're going down the straightaway and you're pretty much flat. All of a sudden you're sitting in a real high bank, and the car does change. It has a reaction almost instant when you go into turn. So it's pretty tough to get a car to settle down real quick like that.
At Bristol, for example, you run 500 laps, which is a little over 250 miles, but you're in the corner so long, so you don't have very little time to relax or whatever. And normally if something happens, it happens in a hurry. It seems like every time you run there, you're out of control. I mean, it's a point of if your race car is right, it's easy to drive. It's all, regardless where you go, you got your hands full.
Bristol is hard on everything. The car never gets a rest itself. It's always bouncing around. Even since they put the concrete down, it's still a rough surface. Shocks are constantly in movement. Everything's getting bounced around. And the load and the G-forces that's generated at Bristol, it makes it where the car, any kind of metal fatigue at all in that race car is going to show up, especially at Bristol. Because of the banking and because of how much load the car gets in the corner, because of how rough it is and everything's getting to work, we'll have to run springs basically like we would at Charlotte and Atlanta and Michigan, maybe a 2,000-pound right front spring. Because I've been a part of a situation where at Bristol, you'd have a handling problem. We run lake speed there one time. The car would push. We could not get the car to keep from pushing in the center of the corner. And what we found out it to be, the car was bottoming out. We kept softening the right front spring. We kept softening the sway bar, but the car still would push. The reason being, as we was softening all those things, it was just digging into the racetrack harder. It would go in and bottom out in the racetrack and just slide up the racetrack as it had a pushing characteristic. We simply solved it by raising the car up. That's something that a lot of people don't do at Bristol, but you got to run your car high enough off the racetrack at Bristol that it don't bottom out and enhance a chassis problem. I've heard of a lot of people say they take their oldest car to Bristol because if it gets used up, it won't be a big loss. I'm really...
When you say gets used up, tell the folks what you're talking about.
Normally used up means it gets loaded on the flatbed and you're trying to figure out how to get it in the trailer.
Gets crashed big time.
Big time.
There's no better example than the night race in 1993 when Mark Martin battled back from 2 laps down to take the bittersweet rewards of a victory at Bristol. When he reached the winner's circle, he couldn't even stand to respond to the cheers. One of the most incredible things about stock car racing is how in the same sport, different tracks present entirely different sets of challenges and dangers. While you're trying to preserve your equipment at a place like Bristol over a course of a race, that equipment could disappear in a flash at the super speedways of stock car racing, places like Talladega, and perhaps the most famous track of them all, Daytona, where you go from a flat straightaway to abruptly to a 31-degree bank. Tough racetrack.
Daytona has the same characteristics of a Darlington. The track was built in 1959 for 130 miles an hour, maybe at max, 140 miles an hour. And today, without restrictor plates, we could easily run 220 there. So Daytona is a very difficult track, and turn 4 at Daytona, again, is one of the most dangerous and most difficult turns there is on any racetrack. But because of the speeds we run there and the way the cars handle and the way we can race each other at Daytona, it makes it one of the most difficult racetracks in my mind.
Daytona International Speedway, built in 1959, NASCAR's first true super speedway. Corners banked 31 degrees. Straightaways are banked 6 degrees, and the tri-oval at the start-finish line is banked 18 degrees. Let's take a sample lap. Go by the tri-oval. Again, banked 18 degrees. Down the short chute between the front stretch to turn 1, 1,200 feet down there. Into turn 1. The problem with Daytona, the transition from the straightaway to the corner is so abrupt. It's not a very gradual thing, so the car really wants to get light as you go in the corner at Daytona. Most guys today will take the car right to the bottom of the racetrack, the short way around the racetrack, run through the bottom through turns 1 and 2, never having to back off the throttle at Daytona. Exit turn 2, you let the car come up against the outside retaining wall and follow that down the backstretch. This is 3,600 feet, and you accelerate. Probably 3-4 miles per hour is all you accelerate as you go down the backstretch, because you are running wide open through the corners. Into turn 3, once again, the transition very abrupt. Flat, straightaway, boom, you're in a 31-degree corner. Car gets very light going in the corner. Into the corner, once again, not backing off the throttle, never coming off the floor. To the bottom of the racetrack, come off turn 4, up against the outside retaining wall, and it's now 1,200 feet to the start of the tri-oval. Into the tri-oval to the start-finish line. Tri-oval, once again, is banked 18 degrees. Daytona is not only one of the most challenging tracks, but also site of some of the most memorable moments in the sport.
Look at Richard Petty coming up on the inside.
Come on, King. What are you doing down there?
He's showing muscle early in the race. On the first lap, he goes 3 wide into turn number 3 with Greg Sachs in the middle and Derek Pope on the outside. And here we go into the 4th corner now.
Boy, somebody's got to give there.
3 abreast racing. Look at this. Coming out of corner number 4, they touch. All 3 cars are touching as they come down through the tri-oval, but everybody maintains position.
Wow.
Oh no, Sachs is in trouble.
And takes Petty with him.
And we're going to have a terrific crash here as nearly all the field is going to be involved in this crash. There are only about 10 or 12 cars that survived this melee just past the starting line.
The key to Daytona and all the super speedways is using the air around the race car. That's called the art of drafting. What is drafting? That's simply following the car in front of you as he goes through the air, breaks that air for you, you ride in the void behind him. That can be a friend because it will make your car go faster. That less resistance makes your car go faster. The negative side, that takes the downforce off your car. Downforce is what keeps your car glued to the racetrack in the corners, able to go through the turns as well. So drafting can make you run faster, but you have to be awfully careful because it can take away downforce, and that is critical in getting the car around the racetrack. Well, how do you do this? That starts way before you get to the racetrack. Here's Larry.
We'll try to work on things here at the shop and at the wind tunnel within NASCAR rules to get as much downforce in the car as we can with add and rear spoiler, because add and rear spoiler, it's one of the most effective ways to get rear downforce, but it also adds more drag to the car than probably anything you can do to it. But when you get to the racetrack and your car is painted and lettered, there's not much more you can do to put rear downforce in it other than add rear spoiler. And at most racetracks, we don't have a problem putting just as much spoiler as we need to put on it. But at Daytona and Talladega, right now, the minimum is 40 degrees. We want to work just as hard as we can to make sure we don't have to put more than 40 degrees because it's going to add drag, and that's going to take away from the aero horsepower of that race car. I think especially by the time race day comes along at Daytona, chassis is real important because normally, I mean, how many pole sitters at Daytona for the Daytona 500 has actually won the race? It hadn't happened a lot if you look back over the course of the years. On qualifying day, it's pretty much who's got the most aerodynamic, least drag race car with the most horsepower. Handling's still important. Your driver's still got to be able to stay on the gas all the way around without backing off. But one thing that's become real important with restrictor plate racing, and we've learned this through some of our data acquisition, is the least amount that the driver moves the steering wheel, he'll run a faster lap. If the car's pushing and won't turn as good and he has to turn the wheel more, even though he hadn't backed off the gas, with as little bit of horsepower as these cars have with the restrictor plates, when you turn the wheel, it bogs the motor down, it scrubs speed. So we have to make that driver hold that steering wheel just as straight as he can, even through the corners. And that's what we have to work on. That's where handling becomes real important.
The air can become your nemesis with the slightest miscue. Step out of line at Daytona and Talladega, and you can go from the lead to a dozen spots back in the matter of seconds. Darrell Waltrip, one of the greatest drivers in the history of the sport, with 3 NASCAR Winston Cup championships and over 80 career victories. It took him 17 years, but he finally won the Daytona 500. But in 1991, he learned what it was like when things go wrong at Daytona.
Uh-oh, we've got a problem. Darrell Waltrip tumbling down the backstretch. What appears to be a very, very serious crash.
DW would be all right despite the wild ride. My good buddy DW just mentioned Darlington. That's the first time we've heard of the track known as the Lady in Black. But don't worry, we'll tackle that track that's also been called Too Tough to Tame before long. But when it comes to different racetracks that trouble different drivers, it's surprising some that get mentioned.
Newer tracks that I find to have a real tough turn on it, and you don't see a lot happen there, but every lap it gets your attention. That's Phoenix coming off of turn 2. You come running off there wide open, and that wall that comes out at, on the exit, it just jumps right out at you. And I scared myself more than one time getting off there wondering if I was going to hit it or not.
As far as the turns, Atlanta's a pretty nervy track. Going in both corners, it's a pretty fast racetrack. It's mostly all corners, and you're hitting 190 mile an hour getting in the corners. So that's a pretty nervy track. It's there's so many grooves you can run. You got to think about killing yourself and going, in the right groove.
The toughest tracks in Winston Cup racing for me are the ones that my drivers don't like the most. I really enjoy going to Richmond, and I think Pocono is grand, and we don't manage to run as well there as we'd like to, based on the fact that that we haven't yet figured out exactly how to get the car the way it needs to be, or our engine doesn't make as much power as it needs, or the drivers don't like the track.
Twice a year, the Winston Cup circuit makes a right turn off the normal flow of things. The show visits the road courses. That's once in Watkins Glen, New York, and once in Sonoma, California, for the only time during the season that drivers turn left and right. And that requires a delicate balance of horsepower and handling, definitely making these 2 of the toughest tracks on the circuit.
The road course, and I'm real reluctant to say this as a crew chief, but your driver does make a big difference at a road course. We've had some champions, some excellent race car drivers come through the ranks, but when they got to Sears Point, Riverside, or Watkins Glen, they would struggle, and I think a lot of that would be just their capability to do all the things that's required. But it asks a lot out of the race car, because you've got to have an excellent motor combination. You've got a motor that got to run at low RPMs as well as high RPMs. Handling's real important, because there's not a whole lot of straightaways at the road courses, especially at Sears Point. Brakes are real important at the road courses, because you're trying to get as much speed as you can. As we spoke earlier, you want to stay on the gas as long as you can on the straightaway. So what that's going to make you do, getting in the corner, you're going to have to get the car stopped and slow down. So brakes is real important at the road courses. To a lot of people's surprise, people would think that we really turn a lot of RPMs at the road courses. We really don't turn that much RPMs at the road courses, except at just a few places. Normally, as you said, we'll be turning in the high 7,000 range, maybe around 8,000. At some places, you'll see it run up to 8,500. But you've got to have the gearing and the motor combination to go with it, to where you never lug the motor, but you got enough power to pull you through all the straightaways and on the exit of these corners. Because we've learned today that anytime you're not turning the most RPMs you can at any point of any racetrack, you're laying power down on the bench. You're leaving power behind. So we try to turn as many RPMs as we can at every racetrack we go to, and that means on every straightaway of the 2 road courses.
And now, folks, time out just 1 second. We keep using this term RPMs. What are we talking about? We're talking about revolutions per minute that a racing engine spins over. Now, here's 1 revolution. That's 1. Now, every other time that this piston comes up, it compresses an air and gasoline mixture that comes in. Now, there's a cylinder head that sits on top of this, so as it comes up, it does compress this mixture. A spark plug sits here, and every other time it it puts out a spark. Boom, there's an explosion. And that piston goes down, comes back up. That happens 8,000 times per minute. How these engines stay together is beyond me. And sometimes they don't. Here's a look at one of our choices for one of stock car racing's most challenging tracks. Let's take a lap on top of Jeff Bodine's Motorcraft Ford. Watch the guardrails on the left and right. You'll see there's very little runoff area at Watkins Glen. No place to go when you get in trouble. Down to turn 1. Heavy on the brakes. Downshift to second gear. Now to the inside of the racetrack. Come back up. Accelerate in second gear. Shift to third about right here. Now we'll go back to the right. This is the start of the S's. We go uphill, a left-hander, and you can see the guardrail right and left. Back to the right, shift into high gear about right now and build up to about 170 miles an hour. Building speed towards the inner loop. And baby, you hope the brakes hold when you hit them. Right there on the brakes hard. Second gear into the inner loop. Now back to the right to turn 5. We're back in second gear, accelerating through this corner. Picking up the throttle as you can. About right here, you're wide open on the throttle, going towards turn 6, a short straightaway towards turn 6. Third gear, once again, see the guardrail right and left, no place to go. As you go across the bridge, hard on the brakes here, second gear, left-hander. Back to the right, up against the ripple strips. Now we got to go back to the left to get set up for turn 7. Still in second gear, coming by the start-finish line. Third gear, you just completed a lap at Watkins Glen International Raceway. Here's how Brett Bodine, one of the top young drivers and most articulate on the circuit, has to say about what makes the Glen so tough.
We were so used to the racetrack, driving hard down up that back straightaway, hard right-hand corner on the old track, and then when they installed the inner loop, it was kind of like an added-on piece. You know, there's cement, there's curbs, there's ridges to run over. The track's gotten torn up from us running on it, and it's just getting tougher and tougher every time we go up there. That one section of the racetrack really gives me the hardest time of any place else on the circuit.
The Glen's West Coast counterpart, Sears Point International Raceway, can be even more difficult to conquer.
Coming into the turn, Martin drives her in deep and locks the brakes and won't get it. Well, here he comes, back up on the outside. He might be able to do it. Oh! Again, Martin spins around and slams into the guardrail on the inside. Wow.
Sears Point is so unique from any of the road courses that we have run, even from Riverside or Watkins Glen. So many more corners, so many more terrain, elevation changes. It is really a driver's racetrack because the race car, you can only ask out of it so much. The race car can only adapt so much to the different corners, the different radius corners, the different bankings, and all of the things that make Sears Point so much different from Watkins Glen. The driver has to be the one to make it happen on the racetrack. Make the adjustments in his driving style, his line, to overcome what the car doesn't have its capabilities. And Sears Point has been a place that I really enjoy because it is such a demanding and challenging place. I like a good challenge, and boy, I'll tell you, there's nothing like racing at Sears Point, trying to get your car to work the best as possible each and every part of that racetrack. And Watkins Glen is like a super speedway compared to Sears Point.
This is Sears Point International Raceway in the wine country of California, Napa Valley. Let's take a lap at Sears Point inside Mark Martin's Valvoline Ford. By the start-finish line, turn 1 is a left-hander. On the brakes, now we start uphill. Change of terrain. Now these guys got to be careful to stay in the groove because if they get away from that curb, the lap time will slow down considerably. Accelerate to turn 3, still going uphill. Little kink is 3A. Now downhill towards turn 4. Once again, hard on the brakes. to the inside of the racetrack, accelerating to turn 5. As they go through turn 5, they're going to turn 6, and it's the carousel. As they go up the hill, they lose the horizon and lose the racetrack. Very difficult corner to get into. The cars stay on the inside of the racetrack, accelerate as they come off the corner to turn 7. Let's see how Brett Bodine handles the carousel.
One of the keys I found is getting into the carousel is to get in there not too deep and make sure you don't use too much brake, because that can get you in trouble. We've seen so many guys drive into the corner too deep, like you said, coming in to where you lose the horizon. The corner actually, the track falls away from you so fast that the car will get light for a second, actually maybe come off the ground just a little bit. And if you're on the brake pedal, you can cause the rear wheels to lock up, and there's not a lot of runoff area there. And we've seen so many cars end up into the tire barrier. So one of the keys there is to get in there at a good rate of speed, but try to use as least amount of brake as possible to keep the car rolling freely as you enter the corner. Then the key is to pick the throttle up. You try to pick the throttle up as soon as possible, but because it is almost an off-camber, downhill corner, it's just very, very hard to get very much throttle at all until you do reach the bottom of the corner and are basically down on the flat of the drag strip. It's a flat straightaway, but you're still having to make a corner. It's a truly demanding part of that racetrack that if you're hooked up through there, you can do a lot of passing up that straightaway and going into the next corner.
This is turn 7, one of the favorite spots to pass on the racetrack, and 2 different grooves. We can see Jeff Bodine in the middle of the racetrack, Mark Martin in the inside. Let's let Brett Bodine take us through the S's.
The key to the S's is the first corner. The first corner as you enter the S's, if you miss that corner, it throws your rhythm totally off for the rest of that section of the racetrack. You can't miss that corner and then pick it up and expect, well, okay, I'll save it here the rest of the way out through that part of the racetrack. You've got to get it right from the start. And once you do that, once you get into a good rhythm through there, you can make up an awful lot of time. You can't pass anybody there. It's a place on the racetrack that you can only gain time. You can't pass anybody. But because if you gain time on someone, you're able to outbrake somebody into the final corner of the racetrack and set your pass up for that part of the racetrack. It's a very critical part as far as maybe passing on another part of the racetrack. But as far as making time, that's a very good place to make up some time on that racetrack.
Through turn 10, now we're going to 11, the favorite place to pass on the racetrack. Get position on the guy, get inside and pass. Heavy, heavy on the brakes. This is a very slow corner. Second gear to the inside of the racetrack as far as you can go. Now pick up the throttle, accelerate off the corner, up against the retaining wall, back to the start-finish line as you shift and complete a lap at Sears Point Raceway.
The key to getting into that corner, I think, is making sure you get your downshifting and your braking done in a point that you are able to then pick the throttle up again as soon as possible, but not a lot of throttle because you create a lot of wheel spin. It's a situation where you've got to really treat the gas pedal like it's got an egg on it so that you just squeeze it very lightly to start with, get your car under motion, and then use a lot of power to accelerate towards the start-finish line.
You miss one turn at Sears Point, and then you might be 3 more turns getting back on track, because it's not like Watkins Glen where you make a turn, go straight, make a turn, go straight. You miss one at Sears Point, and you're messed up for a half a lap.
At Sears Point, turn 7 is the hardest, especially in a Winston Cup car. It's a pretty flat turn, and on the outside of the turn, when you're going through the right-hander, the pavement changes, and it's really slippery, and it's really hard to get these big, heavy cars through there with no tire. You really got to be agile on the throttle and really try to get the power down, because it's real important. That launches you for the second half of the track, really, at Sears Point. You got to, when you get off of turn 7, that gets you all the way back through turn 11. So it's real important to get out there, and it's really hard to get out there right. And I think I've run there about 10 or 12 times, and I think I've done that corner right probably once or twice.
The road courses are kind of tough as far as the driver's concerned, but for the crew they're real easy because you just give them what you can give them, and you can't really tune a car for a road course like you can for an oval. An oval, you always turn and left, you can just concentrate on segments of the racetrack. A road course twists out through the woods like at Watkins Glen, or up the hills like at Sears Point, so you just kind of say, well, here's a pretty good balanced race car. It's not too loose, it's not too tight. Good gearbox, good brakes, a good engine, go do the best you can with it.
Through racing history, the challenges of keeping a 3,500-pound stock car on a road course has resulted in some incredible moments. Like 1991 in Sears Point, the late Davey Allison and Ricky Rudd were going for the white flag, looking for an advantage in treacherous turn 11. The result was the controversy of the season.
Coming up on the white flag, Benny. Here they are.
Rudd is there.
11. Oh, and Davey Allison is spun. Ricky Rudd now has the lead. All kinds of contact here in the last few laps. And the white flag flies for Ricky Rudd.
Davey would get the victory despite Rudd's protest, potentially costing Ricky a chance at the championship, as he would finish second in points to Dale Earnhardt when the season ended.
Yes.
Then back in 1988 at Watkins Glen, there was a duel of the road course aces, Rudd and Rusty Wallace. The two superstars tried every trick they knew to gain an advantage to win as they came down to the final corner.
He was going to slow it down in that turn, and
they bump. Here they come off the 7th corner. Who's going to win it? They're side by side. Rusty is well off the track. He cannot win it, and Ricky Rudd does. Unbelievable.
Well, we've seen the physical beating of a short track, the speed of Daytona, the winding and constant challenge of a road course, and the unique complexity of Pocono. But have we visited the venue posing the ultimate challenge? It might seem so, but there's one track that is a true test of men and machines. Darlington, the track that's too tough to tame. And they're not kidding.
Darlington's just the corners are tough to get around. It's narrow, it's real fast. Only takes a few laps. The tires give up because of the surface, and it just makes it where it's slippery. So that makes it real tough.
A place like Darlington probably would be one of the most difficult corners to get around, I think, because of the deterioration in the racetrack and the slippage and the heat playing a factor. I'd say that probably. And
it's very, very hard there to stay out of trouble. You get racing other cars and you get yourself in trouble. You're better off just racing the racetrack, setting as fast as pace as you can without getting yourself in trouble, and see where you end up at the end of the day.
Mention Darlington, you get a lot of strong opinions, that's for sure. Let's take a closer look. Track was built in 1950. It's dubbed Too Tough to Tame. It's a 1.366 mile egg-shaped oval with turns 1 and 2 banked at 25 degrees and turns 3 and 4 banked at 23 degrees. The straightaways are equal in length at 1,228 feet. Let's take a lap around Darlington. Okay, off the gas, on the brakes, down at turn 1. Bottom of the racetrack, the car will naturally go up, almost to the wall. We can see where the groove is up here, close to the wall. Then the cars will come off, go down the back straightaway. And I think you can see just what a sharp left-hand corner you have going in turn 3 at Darlington. Here you're on the gas heavy, about 175 miles an hour, on the brakes hard. The car drops down to the bottom of the racetrack. That throws you right back up to the top. And you can see that we can't see where we're going. All you're seeing is straight ahead. Well, when do I turn the wheel? Is it too early, too late? See, if you wait too late, what happens is that the wall just simply jumps out right in front of you. You have to make your decision back in the corner when to turn the steering wheel.
Darlington is real unique in the fact that if you took an airplane and flew over it and looked down at it, it looks like the two ends don't belong with each other. They're completely different. Turn 1 and 2 is tight. Turn 3 and 4 is wide and sweeping. Actually, we feel like that turn 4 is actually two little separate corners with a little straightaway in between. To get the car where it's tight enough where the rear end don't break loose off too, when you get that to happen, the car won't want to turn over in turn 4, and the driver has to get off the throttle to make the car turn. You got to try to reach a compromise between the two corners and get it to not be loose off the 2 and to turn over in turn 4.
You just got to get mad and mean and grit your teeth and talk to yourself. I mean, because you're really struggling with the race car. You're trying to make it do something that it doesn't want to do. The car's sliding a lot, and you have all these senses going on. I mean, you're feeling the car slide, and you're through the steering wheel and through your tailbone, and you really just have to get mad and really drive the thing hard. And it's That's the best way I can describe it.
You got to stay low off turn 4. You can't really get side by side. So if you want to pass somebody, you got to set them up about halfway down the back straightaway. So because you know if you get side by side turn 4, chances are you might not make it out. But there's a good chance you could, but sometimes you don't. So you don't want to take a risk.
You've got to concentrate, be patient, and be aggressive. You know, that sounds tough, but it's what it takes. So how do you try to find this magic combination for this track of contradictions? Well, technically speaking, how do you solve the problem of the car pushing? I mean, that's when you're trying to turn the car and it just keeps going straight in the corner.
Pretty much the same format will apply to all racetracks from Martinsville to Talladega. You know, the same little old ground principles. If a car's loose, more right front springs, softer rear springs, bigger front sway bar, lower the track bar. We've learned that if a car won't come off the corner from not turning, which we're working on the exits of both corners at Darlington, that it won't run down the straightaway, and it'll make your motor man or your crew chief feel like that his motor's not running. But if that car won't run off the corner, chances are it's going to make the motor seem like it's weak down the straightaway.
Darlington is the ultimate challenge for driver and crew chief. Make a mistake either behind the wheel or in setting up the car, quite simply, you're going to pay a price. It could be the fabled Darlington stripe, that's a little paint on the right side, or it could be worse. Now here's Richard Petty, probably the greatest driver in the history of the sport, not only wrecking in turn 4, but careening down into the wall on pit road. The Lady in Black has showcased the legends of the sport at their best, such as the fierce battle between the old Intimidator and his heir apparent. Dale Earnhardt and Ernie Irvan duked it out lap after lap, trying to avoid the reach of her walls, keeping each fan breathless as the battle raged.
That's a little nudge to say, Ernie, you didn't give me any room. That's a little love tap.
Then there was that one magical afternoon when one brash future champion, Darrell Waltrip, whose driving skills transcended the limitations of the treacherous track, as he battled the king, Richard Petty, lap after lap, eventually reaching victory lane and creating a new legend.
Well, you can see it happening right before you. They're coming to turn 3. 2 more turns to go. Richard Petty still side by side. Donnie Allison still hanging in third. Oh! Petty has got to leave it. There comes Walter down below him as Petty slid up high. Donnie Allison trying to move past Petty into second place. They're coming to the finish line. It is Darrell Waltrip winning the Rebel 500. Petty is second.
Folks, the quest for speed, for that perfect lap, that perfect afternoon, is something you get closer to, but never quite reach. And sure, that quest has led to some neat technology and ingenuity, but ultimately, it's not about computer readouts and high-tech research. At the heart of the quest is a relationship between the man holding the steering wheel and how he feels about his car. It all hinges on that instinct, because if he listens, the race car will tell him what it needs.
A bad race car, there's no communication between the car and the driver. The driver, I never feel like I know what it needs. I just, I come in and I throw my hands up in the air. We're not fast enough, we're not good enough. There's no way that I know what to do about it. You can take a good race car and it's almost hard for us to run bad with a good race car. It's clear, it tells me every time exactly what it is, sway bar, wedge, spring, whatever, and it's like rolling, falling off a log.
Hey, that about says it all, doesn't it? Well, thanks for joining me on this very special video. It was my pleasure to spend some time with you on this true insider's tour of the toughest tracks in stock car racing. This is Benny Parsons. See you at the track.
Hey race fans, now you have a chance to gain an advantage, the NASCAR Advantage. This unique plan includes 24-hour emergency road service, including free towing, jump starts, tire changes, lockout service, emergency concierge service, customized trip routing, auto theft and hit and run reward, lost key tag return service, hotel and car rental discounts, and much, much more. Plus, you'll receive another peace of mind, spouse coverage at no extra charge. RV program also available. Watch for future NASCAR race fan benefits. To order by credit card, call 1-800-285-5656 or write to NASCAR Advantage, Post Office Box 5100, Thousand Oaks, California, 91359. Who better to bring you a complete national road service plan than NASCAR, the road service experts? Get the NASCAR Advantage today.